It all started with an announcement that shook the world of science. A team of skilled researchers had been selected to study a mysterious zone deep within the Earth's southern hemisphere, a place where magnetic fields twisted unnaturally and communication devices often failed. Locals called it the Earth Zone, a name that carried both fascination and fear. Many old records described strange events happening there, equipment shutting down for no reason, compasses spinning endlessly, and people who went missing without a trace. Scientists dismissed those stories as myths or exaggerations, claiming they were products of superstition. But this team was determined to prove that nothing on Earth was beyond human understanding. The leader of the group was a confident man who believed in logic above all else. He often said that fear was the tool of the ignorant, and only those who dared to step into the unknown could make history. His words inspired the others, geologists, physicists, and engineers, each of them eager to be part of something extraordinary. They were warned many times not to go. Local villagers came to their camp and begged them to turn back, telling tales of people who vanished when they tried to explore that land. The old men swore that the place was alive, that it swallowed those who disturbed its silence, but the team laughed it off. To them, these were just stories told by people who didn't understand science. The journey to the zone took several days. They traveled through dense forests, crossed rough rivers, and moved deeper into land that seemed untouched by time. The air grew heavier, the sky dimmer, as if nature itself was trying to warn them. Strange readings appeared on their devices, spikes in temperature, sudden magnetic pulls, but the team saw these as exciting challenges. Their pride kept them going, and their excitement blinded them to the unease that grew with every step. When they reached the border of the Earth's zone, everything felt different. The air had a stillness that didn't feel natural. Even the insects were silent. The compass needles trembled, spinning uncontrollably, and their communication radio began to pick up faint whispers, like static mixed with distant voices. Some of the younger members hesitated, suggesting they should take a break or recalibrate their instruments. But the leader, with his calm and confident tone, reminded them that discovery never comes to those who fear mystery. And with that, they stepped into the forbidden land. The first night inside the zone was strange. Their electronic watches stopped working. The digital clocks on their equipment froze at midnight, no matter how many times they reset them. Yet the stars above seemed to move faster, as if time outside their instruments was slipping by differently. One of the researchers noted that his sense of direction felt distorted. When he turned north, he felt a pull to the east. Still, they documented every anomaly carefully, believing they were collecting data that would change scientific understanding forever. But deep inside, not everyone felt confident anymore. One of the engineers confessed that the silence made him uneasy. There was no wind, no animal sound, not even the rustle of leaves. The forest around them stood completely still. He said it felt like the trees were watching. The others laughed softly, saying it was just exhaustion or the influence of the electromagnetic waves on his mind. Yet that night no one slept peacefully. Some heard faint footsteps circling the camp. Others swore they saw brief flashes of light among the trees. When they checked, nothing was there. The next morning they tried to send a signal back to their base camp, but every device failed. The radio emitted only strange noises, soft humming that sometimes sounded like human breathing. The geologist, usually calm, began to worry. He said the soil samples they had taken showed elements that shouldn't exist naturally in that region. It was as if something beneath the ground had changed the composition of the Earth itself. The team leader brushed off his concerns and told everyone to keep working. They had come too far to let fear ruin their progress. As they moved deeper, the atmosphere thickened. It became hard to breathe, though their meters showed normal oxygen levels. The deeper they went, the more the world around them began to lose its normal rhythm. The trees leaned at odd angles, and the sunlight seemed to flicker as if someone was dimming it. One of the researchers stopped suddenly and asked if anyone else could hear a low vibration beneath the ground. At first, no one paid attention, but soon they all felt it. A soft, continuous hum that grew louder with every step. They set up another camp near a hill covered in strange black stones. The physicist said the stones seemed to emit weak radiation, but not of any known type. He wanted to collect samples and run detailed tests. The others agreed, though uneasiness lingered in the air. As night came again, the campfire burned oddly blue. The team gathered around it, trying to convince themselves that everything they were seeing had a logical explanation. Still, deep inside, each of them started to sense that they were no longer in a place that followed the usual rules of nature. That night, one of the younger members went missing. They searched the entire area but found only his backpack near the black stones. His camera was still inside, and when they checked the photos, the last few images were blurred. In one of them, a strange, faint outline appeared, something tall and shapeless standing near the trees. No one could say for sure what it was, and no one wanted to admit what they felt. Fear began to settle among them, but pride kept their mouths shut. By morning, their equipment started to fail completely. Laptops wouldn't turn on, batteries drained instantly, and metal tools became hot to the touch. The geologist suggested leaving, saying they already had enough data to publish. But the leader refused. He said they were on the edge of something monumental, and history only remembers those who go beyond fear. His words carried weight, but the fire of confidence in his eyes now looked forced. The next hours were filled with confusion. The sky darkened suddenly, though it was still morning. Birds flew away in swarms from the distant forest, and the low humming beneath the ground turned into a pulsing rhythm, almost like a heartbeat. The physicist, trembling, said that maybe the Earth's magnetic field was collapsing locally, creating distortions in time and sound. But deep down, none of them believed their own explanations anymore. As the light faded, one of the team members whispered that maybe the locals were right, that the place wasn't meant for people to enter. But the leader, though visibly nervous now, still insisted they continue. He couldn't accept failure, not after coming this far. The team moved further in, unaware that every step was taking them closer to the heart of something ancient and beyond their understanding. The night came without warning. Their flashlights flickered and died. In the darkness, the humming grew louder until it became almost unbearable. The ground trembled slightly, and from the shadows they heard something move, slow, deliberate, circling them. No one spoke. Fear had finally taken over. They huddled together, waiting for dawn, but in that endless night, dawn never came. Far away in the base camp, the control team waited for communication that never arrived. The last signal they had received from the expedition ended with static and a faint voice saying, "We shouldn't have come here." After that, silence. And that was how it began, the story of those who were warned to stay away from Earth's zone, but whose arrogance led them into the unknown. They had entered seeking truth, but the truth they found was far beyond what the human mind could endure. ChatGPT said the next morning brought no sunlight. The sky above the strange land looked like it was covered in thick gray smoke, though there was no fire anywhere. The remaining team members stood silently around the empty tent of their missing companion. Nobody wanted to say it, but everyone was thinking the same thing. Something had taken him. The leader tried to keep everyone focused. He said their friend might have wandered off and lost his way in the mist, and they would find him soon. His voice sounded steady, but deep inside, fear had already crept into him too. They searched for hours, calling his name again and again, their voices echoing through the still air. But the forest gave no reply. The ground felt soft, almost breathing under their feet. Each step made a faint sound like something hollow beneath the soil. When they reached the spot where the black stones lay, the air felt heavy, pressing against their chests. The physicist bent down to inspect the stones again, but this time they were different. They were warm, almost hot to touch, and faint lines of light ran through them like veins. He quickly pulled his hand back, shocked by the strange heat. The geologist whispered that the stones looked alive now, glowing softly as if responding to their presence. Nobody could explain it. They decided to move their camp away from that hill, hoping to find a safer spot near the stream they had crossed earlier. As they packed their gear, the engineer noticed that one of their cameras had turned on by itself. It was recording, even though no one had touched it. The screen showed static for a few seconds, then flashed an image of their missing teammate standing at the edge of the forest, staring directly into the lens. His face looked pale and his eyes didn't seem normal. They looked empty, like someone who was there but not truly alive. Everyone froze. The image vanished as quickly as it appeared, leaving the screen blank. They didn't know if it was a malfunction or something else, but the fear that moment brought was real and heavy. The leader told them to stay calm. He reminded them that science demanded patience, that maybe their devices were picking up some strange magnetic interference. But even as he spoke, his hands were trembling slightly. They left that place in silence. The deeper they went into the forest, the more twisted the trees became. The branches curved unnaturally, some forming strange patterns in the air. It was as if the forest itself was trying to speak a language humans couldn't understand. When they finally reached the stream, it wasn't as they remembered. The water had turned dark, reflecting no light, and the sound it made wasn't the gentle flow of water. It was more like whispering. They tried to drink from it, but the moment they dipped their bottles, the instruments began to beep wildly. The physicist ran a quick test with a handheld device and said the water contained an unknown element. That was impossible, yet it was there. The leader, however, insisted they continue forward deeper into the zone. He said they couldn't turn back now. Their discovery could change human understanding of Earth itself. That night, they sat around a dim fire, trying to ignore the constant hum beneath the ground. It came and went, like the slow breathing of something asleep under their feet. They barely talked. Everyone was thinking about the same thing, but nobody dared to say it out loud. The missing man's empty tent seemed to watch them like a ghost of guilt. One of the younger members finally spoke, asking if they really believed they were still safe. The leader didn't answer. Instead, he looked up at the dark sky and said quietly that greatness always demands risk. His words hung in the air like a promise he didn't fully believe anymore. Later that night, something strange happened. The engineer who had been fixing one of their broken communication devices said he was hearing voices through the static. Whispers, faint and distant, saying words he couldn't understand. The others gathered around to listen, and indeed they all heard it. The voices were low, almost gentle, but their tone carried a warning. The geologist thought it sounded like someone saying, "Leave." They stared at each other, uncertain whether it was their imagination or a real signal coming through. The leader immediately dismissed it as noise interference, but deep down, even he looked shaken. Sleep didn't come easy that night. The sound of the wind, which had been absent before, suddenly returned, but it didn't sound natural. It moved through the trees in circles, creating a rhythm that almost matched the heartbeat of the humming ground. At one point, the physicist woke up and noticed a faint glow spreading from the direction of the black hill they had left behind. It pulsed slowly, lighting the forest in soft waves of blue. He wanted to wake the others, but fear kept him frozen in place. He just watched until the light faded away, leaving everything silent again. By the next morning, tension had taken over the group. The geologist said they should leave before they lost anyone else. The engineer agreed, but the leader refused. He believed they were close to the core of the phenomenon, maybe even standing on top of something ancient beneath the Earth's crust. He said if they left now, all their sacrifices would mean nothing. His pride, the same pride that had driven him to organize this expedition, now blinded him from seeing the danger. The others wanted to believe in him. He had led them through tough missions before, but this place was different. This was not a normal mystery. It was something alive, something that didn't want them there. Still, they followed him. They packed their remaining equipment and started moving toward the source of the humming. The ground changed as they walked. It became darker and more reflective, almost like metal. Every few steps, they could feel small vibrations running through their boots. The forest grew thinner until they came to an open field surrounded by sharp rocks. In the center was a large circular depression filled with mist. Their meters showed strange readings, temperature drops, radiation spikes, and magnetic waves stronger than anything recorded before. The physicist said quietly that the field was unlike any natural formation. It looked man-made or something else made. The leader stood at the edge of the mist, staring down into it. It was impossible to see what was inside. The air smelled different there, like electricity and burnt metal. He took one step forward, determined to see what lay beneath, but the engineer stopped him. "We shouldn't go closer," he said softly. "The land doesn't want us here." But the leader shook his head and took another step. The humming under their feet grew louder, and the mist began to move as if reacting to him. It swirled in slow circles, forming strange patterns that looked almost like symbols. Suddenly, their devices started to flash uncontrollably. Every screen filled with lines of unreadable code. Their radios turned on by themselves, playing the same whispering voices as before. The physicist tried to turn everything off, but nothing worked. The mist thickened, rising higher, and a sound, low, deep, almost like a heartbeat, echoed through the air. It wasn't mechanical. It wasn't natural either. It felt ancient, as if the ground itself was alive. The team backed away slowly, terrified but unable to look away. Then for a moment, everything stopped, the hum, the wind, the whispers, all gone. The silence that followed was heavy and unnatural. The leader looked around, confused. "It stopped," he said, almost relieved. But as soon as he spoke, the ground beneath them trembled violently. They stumbled, trying to keep their balance. A blinding flash of light shot out of the mist, followed by a deep rumbling sound that echoed like thunder from below the earth. When it ended, they were all thrown to the ground. The air smelled of ozone and ash. Their equipment was completely dead now. No lights, no sounds, nothing. Slowly they got up, shaken and speechless. The leader looked around at the others, his face pale and full of disbelief. For the first time, his confidence seemed to vanish. He whispered, "Maybe we should have listened." The team stood there in silence, staring at the mist, which was now calm again. They didn't know what they had awakened, or if the place had simply shown them its power. But one thing was clear. The Earth Zone was not a place meant for humans to enter. It was older, deeper, and far beyond anything their minds could understand. As night fell again, they decided to make one final camp before trying to find their way back in the morning. No one spoke. The forest around them felt alive, but not in a comforting way. It was as if it was waiting for them to leave, or perhaps for them to disappear like the one who already had. They huddled close to the small fire, each lost in their own thoughts, realizing too late that arrogance had brought them to a place where reason no longer mattered. And as the faint hum returned in the distance, none of them could tell if it came from beneath the ground or... The night was long and heavy with silence. The small fire they made flickered weakly, fighting against the thick air that surrounded them. No one spoke for hours. Every now and then, someone looked toward the dark forest, expecting to see movement. The sounds they once knew, crickets, wind, the rustle of leaves, were all gone. It felt as if the entire place was holding its breath. The team sat close together, each lost in their thoughts, wondering if they would ever make it out of this strange land alive. The leader sat apart from the rest, staring into the darkness with tired eyes. His once strong and confident face now showed signs of doubt. He had always believed that science could explain everything, that every mystery had an answer. But after what they had seen, the glowing stones, the voices through the radio, the mist that moved like it was alive, he no longer knew what to believe. Still, he couldn't admit defeat. Pride and responsibility weighed on him. He had led his team into this place, and it was his duty to lead them out. Just before dawn, one of the team members shook him awake. "Look," he whispered, pointing to the edge of the forest. In the dim light, something was glowing faintly, a soft white light moving slowly among the trees. It looked like a person carrying a lantern. Hope filled them for the first time in days. Maybe it was their missing teammate. Maybe he had found a way back. The leader grabbed a flashlight and started walking toward the light, ignoring the others calling after him to be careful. As he moved closer, the glow seemed to drift farther away. The forest grew denser and the mist returned, wrapping around the trees like smoke. The others followed behind him, trying not to lose sight of one another. The light moved in a strange rhythm, sometimes still, sometimes pulsing as if it were breathing. When they reached a small clearing, the light stopped. It hung in the air just above the ground like a floating sphere. The leader raised his hand slowly, wanting to touch it, but before he could, it flickered and vanished, leaving only darkness behind. The sudden silence was overwhelming. Then from behind them came a faint sound, footsteps. Everyone turned quickly, shining their flashlights in all directions, but there was no one there. The footsteps stopped. For a long minute, no one moved. Then the engineer spoke softly, his voice trembling. "Let's go back. Whatever that was, it's not human." They began to retreat, walking fast but carefully, following their trail back to camp. But when they reached it, the camp wasn't the same. Their tents were still there, but everything looked different. The fire was still burning, though they had left it nearly out. Their bags had been moved, and all the digital watches showed the same time, 3:07 a.m. The physicist checked his equipment, only to find the data readings completely scrambled, like they had been exposed to strong radiation. The leader tried to convince everyone that maybe they were just tired, that their minds were playing tricks. But deep down he knew something was wrong. The forest had changed. Even the direction of the stars above didn't seem familiar anymore. As the sun slowly rose, the mist began to fade, and they decided to try and retrace their path out of the zone. They used landmarks and compass bearings, but soon realized the compass was useless. It spun endlessly, pointing nowhere. They used the map they had drawn earlier, but even that didn't make sense anymore. The trees, the river, the hills, everything looked the same, like they were walking in circles. Hours passed and exhaustion began to take over. At midday, they came across something they had not noticed before. A large rock formation shaped like an arch, covered in markings. The symbols carved into it looked ancient, not like any writing they had ever seen. The geologist inspected it closely and said the rock didn't belong to this region at all. It was as if it had been brought here from somewhere else. The physicist took photos and made sketches, while the others rested. The leader felt uneasy standing near it. The symbols seemed to shift when he looked at them for too long, almost like they were moving. They didn't stay there long. As they continued walking, the air grew colder. The engineer noticed his breath turning white even though the sun was still out. Then the humming sound returned, stronger than ever. It seemed to come from everywhere, the ground, the air, even their own bodies. It made their heads ache. They tried to block their ears, but it didn't help. Suddenly, the geologist dropped to his knees, clutching his head and shouting that he could hear voices inside the sound. The others rushed to help him, but before they could, he fainted. They carried him back toward the river, hoping cold water would help. When he woke up, his eyes were wide and unfocused. He whispered something that made everyone freeze. "It's not a place," he said weakly. "It's alive." They tried to question him, but he didn't say anything more. He just kept repeating those same words. The leader tried to stay calm and said it could be exhaustion or dehydration. But deep inside, he felt a chill. What if the geologist was right? What if this zone wasn't just a part of Earth, but a living thing that reacted to them being there? That night, they built another small campfire, though no one felt like eating or sleeping. The leader sat quietly, staring into the flames. He thought about the warnings they had ignored. The locals had begged them not to come here, but he had laughed it off. He remembered the old man's words. Some parts of the earth do not want to be touched. Those words echoed in his mind again and again. The engineer, trying to lighten the mood, said maybe they would become famous if they survived this. The physicist gave a weak smile, saying fame didn't matter anymore. They just needed to get out alive. As they talked, the temperature dropped suddenly. The fire flickered and went out. Then, in the darkness, they saw faint lights moving again between the trees, small glowing orbs like before. But this time there were dozens of them. They floated silently, circling the camp. The team huddled together, terrified to move. The lights moved closer, slow and steady, surrounding them completely. The leader whispered for everyone to stay still. The air was thick and the humming sound returned, matching the rhythm of their heartbeats. The lights hovered for a moment. Then one of them drifted toward the physicist and stopped right in front of his face. He stared at it, frozen. It pulsed softly, and for a moment his expression changed. His fear faded, replaced by a calm, almost peaceful look. Then, without warning, the lights vanished and everything went dark again. When they lit the fire again, the physicist was sitting still, staring at the ground. He didn't speak for a long time. When he finally did, his voice was quiet and strange. "It showed me something," he said. The others leaned in, asking what he meant. He looked up at them and continued, "It's not trying to hurt us. It's showing us what we've done to the earth. It's angry but not cruel. It wants to be left alone." His words sent chills through everyone. None of them knew whether to believe him or not, but something in his eyes told them he was telling the truth. The rest of the night passed without sleep. The wind started again, whispering softly through the trees as if the forest itself was breathing. In the distance, the faint hum continued, like a warning that wouldn't end. When morning came, they packed what little they had left. The leader finally admitted they needed to find a way out, no matter what it took. He no longer cared about discoveries or glory. He just wanted his team safe. They began walking again, choosing a new direction, guided only by the rising sun. The path ahead was uncertain, and none of them knew if it truly led out of the Earth zone or deeper into it. But one thing was clear to all of them now. They had disturbed something ancient, something beyond human understanding. And it wasn't finished with them yet. The leader looked back one last time at the forest behind them. The mist was thicker again, almost as if it was following them, silently watching. He whispered to himself, "We shouldn't have come here." Then he turned and kept walking, hoping that somewhere beyond the endless trees there was still a way home. The morning after was quiet, but not peaceful. The air was heavy, and even though the sun was visible through the mist, It gave no warmth. The remaining team walked slowly, their steps uncertain. They were tired, hungry, and filled with fear, but they had no choice except to keep moving. The leader led the way, holding a broken compass in his hand even though it no longer worked. His once confident stride had turned cautious. He no longer looked like a man in charge of a mission. He looked like someone searching for hope in a place that had none. They walked for hours through the forest, trying to find any sign that could lead them out. But everything looked the same: endless trees, gray light, and the faint hum beneath the ground that never really stopped. Every few minutes, they thought, they saw something familiar. But when they reached it, it was always different. The physicist said it was like the forest kept shifting, as if the land itself was alive and changing to confuse them. No one laughed this time. They were too tired to deny what their own eyes saw. By noon, the geologist stopped suddenly. He pointed toward the distance where a tall structure stood. It looked like an old tower or maybe a research station. It was covered in vines, but it had the shape of something human-made. A spark of hope flickered among them. Maybe it was an old military post or a communication relay. If it still had power, they could send a signal for help. Without wasting time, they walked toward it. The closer they got, the stranger it seemed. The walls were made of metal, but the surface was covered in patterns, almost like the markings they had seen on the stone arch earlier. The door stood slightly open, swinging gently with the wind. Inside, everything was silent. Dust covered the floors, and old machines stood around, rusted and broken. A thick smell of metal and earth filled the air. The engineer turned on a flashlight and examined the control panels. "This is old," he said. "At least a few decades, maybe more." The physicist found a pile of documents on a desk, the papers yellowed with age. Most of the writing had faded, but one line was still clear. "Do not cross beyond the second perimeter. The readings are unstable." They looked at each other, realizing that someone had been here before them. And they had been warned too. They searched the small structure and found a generator in one corner. It was old, but not completely destroyed. The engineer decided to try and fix it. The others waited in silence as he worked. Every sound seemed louder in that quiet place: the scrape of tools, the faint click of metal, and the soft wind outside. After what felt like hours, the generator coughed to life. Dim lights flickered on, filling the room with a weak yellow glow. For a brief moment, they felt relief. Then they heard it, a faint signal coming from an old radio attached to the wall. The physicist rushed over and adjusted the knobs carefully. Through the static, a voice broke through, faint, broken, but human. It repeated the same words again and again. "Leave the zone. You are not safe. Leave before it resets." Everyone froze. The leader leaned closer to the radio and spoke loudly. "Who is this? We need help. We're lost." But the voice didn't respond. It just kept repeating the same message over and over until finally, the signal faded completely. The engineer switched off the generator, afraid the noise might attract attention. The group sat in silence, trying to make sense of what they had heard. "Before it resets," the physicist repeated softly. "What does that mean?" The leader shook his head. He didn't know. None of them did. But the word resets echoed in their minds like a warning. They decided to rest there for the night. It was the first roof they had over their heads in days. As the darkness settled outside, the building creaked softly, as if it were breathing. The geologist couldn't sleep. He sat near a window staring into the mist, and then he saw movement, figures walking slowly between the trees. He called the others quietly. When they looked, they saw them too. Shadows, shaped like people but moving too smoothly, too silently. They didn't walk like humans. They drifted. The team watched in horror as the shadows passed through trees without a sound and disappeared into the fog. No one slept after that. They stayed close to the dim light of the generator, listening to the strange noises outside, the soft hum, the shifting wind, and sometimes faint whispers that sounded almost human. It was as if the zone was alive and aware of them. The physicist whispered that maybe the place wasn't just physical, that maybe they were inside something like a loop, a place where time and space didn't work normally. The others didn't argue. It was the only explanation that made sense anymore. By morning, the mist was thicker than ever. They decided to leave the station and continue walking, hoping to find a clearing or a way out. Before leaving, the leader picked up one of the papers from the desk and folded it carefully. The message, on it, "Do not cross beyond the second perimeter," felt important even if they didn't understand it yet. Outside, the world looked different again. The trees seemed denser and the light had a strange golden tone, as if the sun was trapped behind glass. The physicist checked his watch, but it wasn't moving. The second hand was frozen. When he tried to shake it, the glass cracked. They all looked around, realizing that even their shadows were behaving strangely, stretching in odd directions, not matching their movements. After walking for several hours, they reached an open field filled with small rocks arranged in perfect circles. It didn't look natural. The geologist said it was impossible for rocks to form that way on their own. The circles were too precise, almost like someone, or something, had placed them there for a reason. In the center of the largest circle was a tall metallic pole with strange patterns etched into it. The physicist said it looked like some kind of antenna, though not one made by humans. They approached it carefully. As soon as they got close, the humming grew louder again, this time vibrating through their bones. The engineer placed a small sensor on the pole to record readings, but before he could remove it, a sharp sound pierced the air. The sensor exploded in his hand, leaving only smoke. They jumped back, terrified. Then the metallic pole began to glow faintly, and the air around it shimmered like heat waves on a summer road. The mist above them started spinning, forming a spiral that reached high into the sky. The leader shouted for everyone to run. They stumbled backward, trying to get away from the strange energy building around them. After several minutes, the glow faded, and everything went quiet again. The pole stood still, but the circles of stones had shifted slightly, as if they had been moved by an invisible force. The physicist's voice trembled as he said, "This isn't nature. This is a system. Something is running this place like a machine." The leader didn't respond. He just looked around with empty eyes, realizing that maybe the word resets from the radio wasn't just a warning, it was a rule. Maybe the zone wasn't a living thing at all. Maybe it was a mechanism, one that repeated itself endlessly, trapping whoever entered inside. As evening approached, the team grew weak. Hunger and exhaustion were taking their toll. The geologist fell behind, limping from a twisted ankle. The leader stayed with him, helping him walk. The physicist and engineer went ahead to scout the path. The forest grew darker and the hum deeper, echoing through the ground like a slow heartbeat. Every sound felt alive. Every shadow seemed to move when they weren't looking. When they reached a small ridge, they stopped to rest. From the top, they could see the mist stretching endlessly in all directions. There was no clear way out. The leader sat down, running his hands through his hair, his mind heavy with regret. He whispered, "We were warned. We were told not to come here." His voice cracked. For the first time, the others saw the fear he had been hiding since the beginning. Night fell quickly. They made another small fire, though it barely lit their faces. The geologist's condition worsened and he started mumbling in his sleep, saying strange phrases like, "The ground is breathing," and "It remembers us." The physicist stayed awake, staring into the flames, whispering that maybe the zone was not part of Earth at all, that it was something left here long ago by something greater. The others didn't want to hear it, but deep down they knew he might be right. The forest around them rustled softly, though there was no wind. The hum returned, stronger now, pulsing like a signal calling them deeper in. The leader looked into the darkness and said quietly, "Tomorrow, we leave, no matter what." But none of them were sure if the zone would let them. The fire burned low, casting faint shadows on the ground. Somewhere in the distance, a faint light appeared again, moving slowly between the trees, as if waiting for them to follow. No one spoke. They just watched in silence, knowing that whatever waited in that light might be their only chance. or their final mistake. The next morning began with an uneasy silence. The team gathered in the main observation tent, each one lost in thought. The air outside was heavy, the sky strangely pale. It was supposed to be just another research day, but everyone could feel that something had changed. The instruments were showing strange readings again, stronger this time, sharper and almost rhythmic, like something alive. The lead scientist stared at the screens, his hands trembling slightly. "It's the same signal," he said quietly, "but stronger than before." The team exchanged worried looks. They had recorded similar signals days earlier, faint vibrations deep beneath the ground, coming from what they called Earth's zone. It was an area locals had begged them not to explore. The people from nearby villages believed that the zone was cursed, a place where the earth swallowed sound and time seemed to twist. The team had laughed off those warnings then, but now their laughter felt distant and foolish. They decided to investigate again, despite the unease. It wasn't about curiosity anymore, it was about pride. They had come too far to turn back now. The machines were packed into trucks, the cameras checked, and the drones prepared for flight. The road to the zone was rough, the ground cracked and dry as if burned by the sun. The wind carried a faint metallic smell that made breathing uncomfortable. No birds flew in that area, no sound of insects, only silence so deep it pressed against their ears. As they entered the zone, the compass needles began spinning wildly. The team tried to laugh it off again, but no one truly felt at ease. The light seemed dimmer here, even though the sun still hung in the sky. The sand glittered strangely, reflecting colors that didn't belong to the earth. One of the younger members whispered, "It feels like this place is watching us." No one replied. They set up camp near a hollow depression in the ground where the readings were strongest. The machines began to hum, scanning the soil and measuring the energy beneath. The numbers jumped unpredictably, climbing higher each minute. "This can't be natural," one of the analysts said, tapping the screen. "It's like something is pulsing down there." The lead scientist nodded but said nothing. His eyes were fixed on the ground, where faint ripples seemed to move beneath the surface dust. Night came fast, swallowing the last bit of daylight. They sat around a small lamp, eating in silence. The wind outside had grown stronger, whistling through the wires and tents. Then came the sound, a deep, distant rumble that made the earth tremble. Everyone froze. The noise wasn't like thunder. It was slower, heavier, almost like breathing. The lead scientist grabbed the radio and called out to the control base several kilometers away, but the signal was full of static. "We're losing communication," he said, trying again, but the static only grew louder. Then one of the sensors began to beep rapidly. The vibration levels were spiking again. "Something's moving down there," someone shouted. The ground beneath them quivered and sand poured from the edges of the pit like flowing water. They ran toward the trucks, but the engines refused to start. The machines went dead and all power cut off. Panic filled the camp. They could see faint lights forming in the hollow, glowing softly like blue mist rising from the soil. It wasn't fire or electricity. It was something else, something strange and unnatural. The lead scientist took a step forward, holding a flashlight, but the beam flickered and died. The glow from the pit was now the only source of light. Everyone stood still, not knowing whether to run or watch. The blue mist began to twist upward, forming shapes that looked like waves, then like faces, though none could tell for sure. The air buzzed like thousands of whispers overlapping. One of the researchers shouted that the readings were going off the scale. The others could barely hear him. Their ears were ringing, their hearts pounding. Then as suddenly as it began, everything went silent. The light faded, the ground stopped shaking. They stood there in the dark, breathing heavily. For a long moment, no one spoke. The sky was full of clouds now, covering the stars. Finally, one of them broke the silence, saying in a trembling voice, "Maybe the locals were right. Maybe this place isn't meant for us." But the leader refused to accept that. He believed that what they had witnessed was an incredible natural phenomenon, something the world needed to see. "We can't stop now," he said firmly. "We're too close to discovering the truth." The rest of the team wanted to leave, but none dared to argue with him directly. He had always been the one to lead with confidence, the one who didn't believe in myths or curses. Still, doubt had begun to creep into everyone's heart. They decided to rest until morning. The night was long and no one truly slept. Strange sounds echoed from the distance, faint footsteps or maybe shifting stones. The air was colder now, and the mist that had risen earlier seemed to linger faintly near the ground. One of the younger members whispered prayers under his breath, while another kept shining his flashlight in every direction, unable to relax. At dawn, they found something odd near the pit. The sand had hardened in strange patterns like glass melted and reshaped. In the center of the pit was a dark circular mark, perfectly smooth. The instruments, when switched back on, showed 0 readings. It was as if the entire area had gone silent again, erasing all traces of what had happened the night before. They packed up quickly, but before leaving, the leader insisted on taking samples from the hardened sand. As he dug a small piece, the earth vibrated slightly again. "That's enough," one of the team members said, fear in his voice. "Let's go." But the leader didn't stop. He picked up the glass-like fragment, holding it to the light. It shimmered faintly with the same blue glow they had seen in the mist. He smiled faintly and said, "This is proof. We're not leaving empty-handed." The drive back was slow and tense. Every few kilometers, their equipment flickered and died. The GPS stopped working halfway. They could only follow the old dirt road, guided by the faint line of mountains in the distance. No one spoke during the journey. Everyone's mind was replaying the same scenes: the shaking ground, the glowing mist, the feeling that something had been watching them. When they finally reached the base camp, their colleagues rushed out to meet them. They looked relieved but confused when they saw the state of the vehicles, covered in fine dust, antennas bent, and the machines showing no signs of life. The leader proudly showed the fragment to the others, placing it on the table under the light. It looked harmless, just a small translucent piece with a faint blue tint, but when they tried to photograph it, the camera malfunctioned. The image came out blurred and distorted. "Maybe it's emitting some kind of radiation," one of the technicians suggested. But the detector showed nothing. The object was silent, lifeless, yet not ordinary. It didn't belong there. That night, when everyone was asleep, the leader stayed in the lab staring at the fragment. It pulsed faintly as if responding to his presence. He leaned closer, whispering to himself, "What are you?" He didn't know that outside, the ground near the camp was starting to tremble again, softly at first, like distant thunder. The wind picked up, carrying that same metallic scent from the zone. The dogs at the camp began to bark wildly, pulling at their chains, sensing something no human could. Inside, the fragment's glow grew brighter, reflecting in the leader's wide eyes. He didn't move, didn't call anyone. Part of him was terrified, but another part, the same part that had ignored every warning, was fascinated. He thought he was about to uncover something beyond science, something that would change everything. But deep in the Earth zone, far from the camp, the ground began to crack again, this time wider, deeper, as if the planet itself was waking up. The same rhythmic vibrations they had recorded earlier started echoing again, growing stronger each second. Whatever they had touched, it wasn't done with them yet. And as the first light of dawn broke, the leader finally realized that curiosity had taken them too far, and now there might be no turning back. The morning came with an uneasy calm. The sun rose slowly over the hills, painting the sky in soft orange shades, but the camp was quiet, too quiet. Most of the team had not slept all night. The strange glow from the fragment had kept them on edge. Every few hours it would pulse faintly, almost like a heartbeat. The leader sat near it, his face pale from exhaustion but still full of determination. He believed that whatever they had found was proof of a deeper mystery buried under Earth's surface. But the others were not so sure anymore. One of the researchers quietly approached him and said, "We need to leave this place. Something isn't right. The air feels heavier every hour." The leader didn't respond. His eyes were fixed on the fragment, which was now resting on a steel plate. "Do you realize what this could mean?" he whispered. "This isn't just an object, it's a message. The Earth is trying to tell us something." The others exchanged uneasy glances. They had seen how the ground had moved, how the lights had formed, how their equipment had gone dead. None of it felt like a message. It felt like a warning. But the leader's pride had taken over his fear. He called the rest of the team and announced that they would return to the zone one last time. "We'll finish the job," he said firmly. "We'll find out what lies beneath." The team tried to protest, but his tone left no room for argument. Soon the trucks were loaded again. The wind had picked up, carrying fine dust across the barren land. The closer they got to the zone, The darker the sky seemed to grow even though it was still morning. The birds that used to fly over the nearby cliffs were gone. It felt like the whole world was holding its breath. When they reached the hollow where they had first seen the glowing mist, the pit looked different. The ground had cracked open wider, forming deep lines that stretched like scars. The air buzzed faintly like static before a storm. The instruments showed strange readings again. But now they weren't just vibrations, they were patterns repeating over and over, as if the earth was sending coded signals. "This is it," the leader said with a trembling voice. "Something is responding to us." He placed the fragment near the edge of the pit. The blue light inside it flickered faster, brighter, almost like it recognized the place. Everyone stepped back. The ground began to hum again. A low, deep sound filled the air coming from beneath their feet. The vibration was so strong that it rattled their equipment. "Sir, we have to move back," one of the team members shouted, but the leader didn't move. He was staring at the fragment, his eyes wide. The light was now spreading from the pit itself. The same blue glow rising again like mist. It twisted and spun in the air, taking strange shapes that looked almost alive. The team stumbled backward, some shielding their eyes from the blinding light. Then came a deep rumble. The earth split further, sending waves of dust into the air. The trucks shook violently, their tires sinking slightly into the cracking soil. The sky turned gray and a strange echo filled the valley. A distant rhythmic pulse matching the same frequency they had recorded days before. It felt like the heart of the planet was beating beneath them. The leader, still standing near the pit, tried to shout something, but his voice was drowned by the roaring wind. One of his team members grabbed his arm, pulling him back toward the truck. "We have to leave now," he yelled. They ran as the cracks widened behind them, swallowing parts of their camp. The mist kept spreading, following them like a moving wave of light. When they finally reached higher ground, they turned around and saw the most terrifying sight. The pit had completely opened. From above, it looked like a giant glowing circle. The light shot upward, reaching the clouds, and the wind howled so fiercely that it bent the nearby trees. Then, as suddenly as it had started, it all stopped. The light vanished, the earth grew still, and silence returned. For several seconds, no one spoke. The leader fell to his knees, staring at the now quiet pit. "It's gone," he whispered. "Everything? Gone?" His voice was full of disbelief. One of the team members said quietly, "No, it's not gone. It's resting again." They slowly made their way back to the camp. The fragment was nowhere to be found. The steel plate where it had rested was empty, slightly burned at the edges. The instruments were dead once more. It was as if the event had drained all energy around them. The leader sat down, burying his face in his hands. The others packed silently, avoiding each other's eyes. By nightfall, they had left the zone behind. The journey back to the city was long and silent. No one dared to speak about what had happened. The leader stared out of the window, lost in his thoughts. He had wanted to prove something, to make a discovery that would put their names in history. But now he couldn't even explain what they had witnessed. When they reached their research facility, they were greeted with relief and curiosity. Everyone wanted to know what had happened out there. But the team had no words. They showed the recordings, but most of the data was corrupted. The sound files contained only low hums and static. The video clips showed flashes of blue light and distorted shapes, but nothing clear enough to prove what they had seen. The leader tried to analyze the samples they had brought back, but the results made no sense. The sand from the zone contained elements that didn't match any known structure on Earth. The magnetic properties of the material changed every time they tested it, as if it was reacting to their presence. It was something beyond science, beyond understanding. Days passed, but the leader couldn't rest. He spent his nights studying the data, watching the same footage over and over. The others had already decided to close the project. They wanted to move on, forget what they had seen. But he couldn't. He believed there was still something buried there, something that had chosen to remain hidden. One evening, he went to his office and opened his personal notebook. On the first page he wrote, "We were warned and we didn't listen." Maybe this was not a discovery to make. Maybe it was a line never meant to be crossed. He closed the book and stared out the window. A faint rumble echoed in the distance, so soft that he almost thought he imagined it. But he knew it was real. Weeks later, the research area was declared restricted. The government sealed it off, calling it unsafe for exploration. No one was allowed to enter. Satellite images showed strange changes in the land. faint circular marks like something had pressed from below. Local villagers refused to go near it. They said the ground still whispered at night, as if remembering what had been disturbed. The surviving team members tried to rebuild their lives. Some moved to other projects, others left science altogether, but none of them ever forgot that day. Sometimes, when they talked quietly among themselves, they described the feeling of standing there, the light, the hum, the strange pull of the earth. They all agreed on one thing: it wasn't just a natural event. It was something alive, something that had warned them to stay away. The leader, now older and quieter, kept to himself. He never shared the full story with the world. Some journalists tried to reach him, but he refused interviews. His once proud voice had turned soft, thoughtful. In his heart, he knew what had happened wasn't just science or mystery. It was a lesson in humility. Years passed, and one day, a new group of researchers requested access to the restricted zone. They wanted to study the strange magnetic patterns that still appeared in the soil. When the leader heard about it, he wrote a letter to them. It contained only one sentence: "Do not go there." The earth remembers. He sent the letter and never spoke of it again. That night, he stood outside his home looking up at the stars. The same faint blue glow flickered for a moment on the horizon, just where the zone used to be. It was brief, almost invisible, but he saw it. And in that moment, he finally understood. Some parts of the world were never meant to be disturbed. The world would go on, forgetting the event, just as it forgets many stories buried by time. But for those who were there, the memory stayed alive. The sound of the trembling ground, the strange light rising from the pit, and the realization that arrogance had led them too far. They had touched something ancient, something deep within the planet that didn't want to be found, and so the Earth's zone returned to silence once more, waiting, watching, holding its secrets beneath layers of dust and time.